My darling children, the first sign that something was about to change was a gentle, deferential knock on my cabin door. Not the flimsy, rattling door of the tiny, windowless cupboard next to the engine room they had given me, but the heavy, polished mahogany door of the ship's magnificent owner's suite. I had been moved there just an hour before, still reeling in a state of stunned disbelief, surrounded by fresh flowers, a bowl of exotic fruit, and a chilled bottle of champagne I hadn't dared to open. A young officer in a crisp white uniform stood in the doorway, his hat in his hands. He cleared his throat nervously. "Mrs. Evans," he said, his eyes wide with a respect I hadn't seen in years. "The captain presents his compliments. He has cleared his schedule and asks if you would do him the honor of joining him for a private dinner on his personal bridge this evening." And as I stood there, looking out my new panoramic window at the endless expanse of the ocean, all I could think about was the look on my son's face when he realized his unimportant old mother was being given the greatest honor on the entire ship, while he and his wife were just two more passengers among thousands. "Hello, everyone. I'm what you can call Grandma Beatrice. My full name is Beatrice Evans. I am 74 years old, and I come from the beautiful coastal city of Portland, Maine. This is a story about a family cruise I took last year. A trip that was meant to be a celebration, but which began with a secret humiliation so deep it almost broke my heart. It's a story I have kept anchored in the deepest part of my soul, a story that even my dearest friends don't fully understand. They saw the photos I posted of me laughing with the ship's captain, dining at exclusive tables, but they didn't know the story behind them. They didn't know about the thrumming, shaking little room in the belly of the ship where I was initially hidden away. Until today, I have finally found the courage to weigh anchor on this secret and let it sail out into the light. Before I begin, my dears, would you do an old woman a kindness? Please, if you would, like this video and subscribe to our channel. Every click feels like a vote of confidence, giving me the strength to finally share a memory that I have, until now, been too proud, or perhaps too hurt, to reveal. You see, children, this story isn't about luxury or revenge. It's about respect. It's about seeing a person for who they are, not just for the role they play in your life. I was a high school principal for 35 years. My entire life was dedicated to seeing the potential in young people, to nurturing it, to helping them become the best versions of themselves. My late husband, Richard, God rest his soul, was a harbor pilot. He knew the sea, and he knew people. He used to say, "Bea, you can tell the character of a ship not by the paint on its hull, but by the state of its engine room. It's what people gonna see that reveals the truth." I thought I had raised my son, Mark, to understand that. I thought I had raised him to be a man of character. When he and his wife, Tiffany, announced they were booking a grand Alaskan cruise for the family, my heart swelled with joy. It was a trip Richard and I had always dreamed of taking. When they asked me to contribute a significant amount for my share of the trip, which I gladly did, from the savings Richard had so carefully set aside for my comfort, I assumed it was a shared family adventure. I never imagined that my own son would take my money and then assign me to the maritime equivalent of a broom closet. This is the story of the moment I realized I was seen as cargo, and the surprising turn of events that reminded everyone on board that I was, in fact, the most valuable passenger they had. My story doesn't truly begin with the cruise, my dears. To understand the ending, you must first understand two very different beginnings. One is the story of my son, and the other is the story of a boy who was like a son to me. It all started so beautifully, of course. Betrayal always wears a pretty mask at first. Mark, my son, was my sunshine. He was a bright, happy child, full of dreams of becoming an architect and building great things. I remember him sitting at the kitchen table for hours, meticulously drawing blueprints for magnificent imaginary houses, his tongue stuck out in concentration. I was so proud of him. I encouraged his dreams, celebrated his successes, and helped him through his failures. As a principal, I knew the importance of a strong foundation, and I dedicated my life to being his. When he brought Tiffany home, I was hopeful. She was dazzling. a successful interior designer with a portfolio of stunning homes and a smile that could light up a room. She was ambitious and driven, and she seemed to adore Mark. "Beatrice," she would say, her voice smooth as silk, "you did an incredible job with Mark. He's the kindest, most wonderful man." She made a point of asking about my career, my life, and I thought we were building a real connection. I thought she was a blessing, and for a time, we were a happy family. The birth of my granddaughter, Chloe, was one of the greatest joys of my life. Sundays at my house became a tradition. The aroma of my slow-cooked pot roast would fill the air. Chloe's laughter would echo in the hallways, and Tiffany would regale us with stories of her wealthy clients. I would look at my son, his face full of love for his wife and child, and my heart would be content. I felt seen, cherished, an essential part of their lives. Now let me tell you about the other boy. His story began about 20 years ago. His name was Leo. He was a student at my high school, but he was nothing like my Mark. Leo was troubled. He was brilliant, especially in math and science, but his home life was a wreck, and he was always in trouble, getting into fights, skipping class. The other teachers had written him off as a lost cause. But I saw something else. I saw a spark of defiance in his eyes that wasn't malice. It was unrealized potential. It was a cry for help. I called him into my office one day after he'd been caught trying to hotwire a teacher's car. He stood before me, sullen and angry, expecting to be expelled. "Leo," I said calmly, looking over my glasses at him, "this report says you're a troublemaker, but your test scores say you're a genius. Which one is the real you?" He just shrugged, refusing to meet my eyes. I didn't give up. I kept him in my office for an hour, not lecturing, but asking him questions. I asked him about the sea. I had seen him down at the docks, watching the ships, and I knew he loved them. His face lit up for the first time as he talked about navigation, about the vastness of the ocean. It reminded me so much of my Richard. I made him a deal. I would get the charges dropped and find him a tutor for his other subjects if he promised me he would join the school's extracurricular sailing program and stop getting into trouble. I saw the hesitation, the disbelief in his eyes. He wasn't used to people believing in him. I became his mentor. I stayed late with him. I checked his homework. I attended his sailing regattas, cheering from the shore. When it came time for him to graduate, he had no idea what to do. I was the one who drove him to the Maine Maritime Academy for an interview. I was the one who wrote his letter of recommendation, speaking of the brilliant, determined young man I knew he was. The last time I saw him before he shipped out for his first cadet tour, he hugged me tightly. "Mrs. Evans," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "I won't let you down. I'm going to be a captain one day." Over the years, we lost touch, as people do. I heard through the grapevine that he was doing exceptionally well, rising through the ranks with incredible speed. I was proud, in a quiet, distant way. I never imagined our paths would cross again in such a dramatic fashion. Now, back to the cruise. It was Tiffany's idea, for Mark's 45th birthday. "A grand family adventure," she announced one Sunday over dinner. "A cruise to Alaska. It will be a memory we'll all cherish forever." Her excitement was infectious. She pulled up glossy brochures of the ship, the In Northern Majesty. It was a palace on water, with sparkling pools, grand dining rooms, and breathtaking views. I was thrilled. The thought of seeing the glaciers, of sharing that experience with my son and granddaughter, was a dream come true. Of course, I knew such a trip was expensive. "Tiffany, dear," I said gently, "it looks wonderful, but you two are saving for a new house. I wouldn't want you to overextend yourselves." "Oh, don't worry, Beatrice," she said with a wave of her hand. "We've got it all figured out. We'll all just pitch in for our own way, and it will be manageable." The way she said it felt inclusive, like a team effort. So when she told me my share, a cabin, all meals and excursions, would be a specific, substantial 4-figure sum, I didn't blink. I wrote the check from the account Richard had left me, my heart full of gratitude for this shared family experience. The months leading up to the cruise were filled with happy anticipation. Chloe would call me, bubbling with excitement about seeing whales and eagles. Tiffany would email me links to formal wear for the captain's dinner. It all felt so warm, so normal. I packed my bags with care, laying out the dress I would wear to the special dinner, imagining myself sitting at a lovely table with my family, the sea gliding by outside the window. I felt so loved, so included. It's important you know this, my dears. It's important you understand the beautiful, happy illusion that was painted for me, so you can truly comprehend the shock and the cold, stark reality I was about to face when I was finally shown to my room. The day of our departure arrived on a wave of excitement. The cruise terminal was a bustling hive of activity, a kaleidoscope of happy families and eager travelers. My son, Mark, handled all our documents, a thick sheaf of papers and tickets clutched in his hand. Tiffany was in her element, directing porters and checking our luggage with the efficiency of a seasoned general. I felt a surge of pride, watching them navigate the chaos so capably. We were a family, on a grand adventure. The first hint of a chill came when we boarded the ship. The sheer scale of it was breathtaking. We stepped into a grand atrium that soared up multiple decks, all glittering gold and crystal. I was wide-eyed, like a child. "Oh my," I breathed, taking it all in. "It's magnificent." Tiffany gave a little laugh, a sound that, in retrospect, was more condescending than cheerful. "It's nice, isn't it? Our stateroom is on the veranda deck. It has a private balcony with a lovely ocean view. We're on deck 8. "How wonderful, dear," I said. "And which deck am I on?" She didn't look at me. She was busy checking something on her phone. "You're on deck 2, Beatrice. It's a cozy interior cabin. Very practical. Cozy. Practical. The words sounded innocent enough, but a small, cold knot began to form in the pit of my stomach. Deck 2? I knew from the ship's layout I had studied that Deck 2 was one of the lowest passenger decks, far from the sunlit verandas of Deck 8. But I pushed the feeling down. "Beatrice, don't be a foolish old woman," I told myself. "A room is just a room. The point is to be with family." A steward guided us to their stateroom first. It was beautiful. A spacious room, with a plush king-sized bed, a sitting area, and floor-to-ceiling glass doors that led to a private balcony overlooking the sparkling water. Chloe was already bouncing on the bed with glee. "Grandma, come see. We can see the whole ocean." "It's lovely," I said, my smile feeling a little tight. Mark and Tiffany exchanged a look, a quick, almost imperceptible glance that I couldn't quite decipher. "All right," Tiffany said briskly, turning to the steward. "Could you show my mother-in-law to her cabin now? 2046. She handed me my key card. "We'll meet you up at the Lido deck for the sail-away party in an hour." She didn't offer to walk with me. Neither did my son. He just gave me a quick, almost guilty-looking pat on the arm. "Settle in, Mom. We'll see you in a bit." And just like that, they were gone. I was left alone in the long, elegant hallway of Deck 8, with a steward I didn't know. A cold fear, the kind I hadn't felt in years, began to crawl up my spine. The journey down to Deck 2 was like a descent into another world. The plush carpeting grew thinner, the elegant artwork on the walls disappeared, and the lighting became more utilitarian. We walked down a long, narrow corridor that smelled faintly of industrial cleaner and something else I couldn't place. It was a low, persistent hum that seemed to vibrate through the soles of my shoes. The steward stopped in front of door 2046. It was tucked away at the very end of the hall, next to a door marked crew only and another stenciled with a large, ominous warning. "Engine room access. Authorized personnel only." He swiped the key card and pushed open the door. My heart sank. Cozy was a cruel euphemism. The room was a shoebox. A tiny, windowless cell with a narrow single bed, a miniature desk, and a bathroom so small I would have to turn sideways to get in the shower. There was no chair to sit on, no art on the walls, and the low vibrational hum was much, much louder in here. It was a constant, deep thrumming that made the very air feel heavy. I stood in the doorway, my suitcase at my feet, and felt the blood drain from my face. This wasn't just a practical cabin. This was the cheapest, meanest, most undesirable room on the entire ship. The kind of room you book when you care about nothing but the price. But I hadn't booked it. They had. With the significant sum of money I had given them. The steward must have seen the look on my face. "Is everything all right, ma'am?" he asked, his voice soft with pity. I couldn't speak. I just nodded, and he quietly backed away, leaving me alone in my shaking, humming little box. I sat down on the edge of the hard, narrow bed, and the full weight of the betrayal crashed down on me. They had done this deliberately. They had taken my money, enough for a lovely room, I was sure of it, and used it to subsidize their own luxurious vacation, while hiding me away in the bowels of the ship. I was not a cherished family member. I was an inconvenient expense to be minimized. I was an afterthought to be stored in the cheapest possible way. My heart felt like someone was squeezing it with their bare hands. At that moment, I felt like the sky was falling. The humiliation was a physical thing, a hot shame that washed over me. Tears welled in my eyes, but I blinked them back with the force of will I had honed over 35 years as a principal. I would not cry. I would not give them the satisfaction. I told myself to be strong. I thought about not going to the sail-away party. I thought about staying in that horrible little room for the entire 7 days, a silent, martyred protest. But then I thought of my granddaughter, Chloe, and I knew I couldn't do that to her. And a spark of my old self, the part that had faced down defiant teenagers and stubborn school boards, ignited. I would not be hidden. I would not be shamed into invisibility. I would go up to that Lido deck, hold my head high, and I would chandere. I changed into a cheerful sundress, put on a bit of lipstick, and made the long journey back up from the ship's engine room to its sunny heights. When I found them, they were lounging on deck chairs, sipping colorful cocktails. "There you are," Tiffany chirped, her smile a little too bright. "Did you find everything okay? Is the room all right?" The question was a performance, a lie she was telling for her own benefit. My voice was quiet, but steady. "It's very vibrational," I said, looking directly at my son. "I'm right next to the engine room." Mark had the decency to look away, a flush creeping up his neck. "Oh," he mumbled. "Well, it's just a place to sleep, right, Mom? We'll be so busy having fun, we'll barely be in our rooms." His glib dismissal, his attempt to normalize their cruelty, was almost worse than the act itself. At that moment, I felt a chasm open between us, a vast, cold ocean I wasn't sure could ever be crossed. Tears just wouldn't stop flowing later that night when I returned to my thrumming little cell. The constant vibration of the engine was a miserable companion, a physical manifestation of my heartbreak. I lay awake for hours, the noise and the hurt, a terrible duet, a miserable soundtrack for the loneliest vacation of my life. The next few days were a masterclass in quiet suffering. I spent as much time as possible with Chloe, taking her to the kids' club and swimming in the pool. But in my interactions with Mark and Tiffany, a cold formality settled in. They would talk about the wonderful dinner they had at a specialty restaurant I wasn't invited to, or the couple's massage they had enjoyed at the spa. They were living a luxurious 5-star vacation, and I was an occasional guest star in their show. The real test came on the third night, the first formal captain's dinner. I looked forward to this, but now my heart was heavy with dread. I put on my best dress, a simple but elegant navy blue gown, and met them outside the grand dining room. Tiffany was breathtaking in a sequin dress, Mark handsome in his suit. They looked like a power couple, and I felt like their dowdy, unwanted accessory. As we were led to our table, I saw that all the tables were set for parties of 10. We were seated with several other families. The maitre d', a distinguished-looking man, held a seating chart. He smiled warmly at Tiffany and Mark. "Mr. and Mrs. Peterson, right this way." He then looked at me, his eyes scanning the list. "And you are?" "Beatrice Evans," I said, my voice barely a whisper. He found my name. "Ah yes, Mrs. Evans, welcome." We sat, and the polite dinner conversation began. People asked Tiffany about her design firm, and Mark about his work. When someone asked me what I did, I simply said, "I'm retired." I was a school principal for many years. Tiffany immediately changed the subject, as if my past was an embarrassment. It was during the main course that the first miracle happened. The ship's distinguished, silver-haired captain was making his rounds, stopping at each table to greet his guests. He was a tall, imposing man with a warm smile and eyes that had seen the world. As he approached our table, he greeted the other guests with practiced charm. Then, he stopped and looked at the seating chart held by his aide. His eyes scanned the names. And then they stopped. They widened, just for a fraction of a second. He looked up from the chart, his gaze sweeping over the table until it landed on me. A slow look of dawning recognition, of utter disbelief, spread across his handsome face. He took a step forward, his eyes locked on mine, ignoring everyone else, including my son and daughter-in-law. His formal, commanding voice was suddenly filled with a warmth and emotion that startled the entire table into silence. "Mrs. Evans?" he said, his voice a mixture of awe and reverence. "Beatrice Evans? From Northgate High?" My dears, in that moment, the entire, noisy dining room seemed to fade into a muffled silence. All I could hear was the captain's voice, thick with an emotion I couldn't comprehend, saying my name. It had been years since anyone had looked at me with such raw, unadulterated respect. For a second, I was confused. My mind, clouded by days of humiliation and the constant, thrumming ache of the engine room, struggled to place him. I am Beatrice Evans," I managed to say, my voice a little shaky. "I was the principal at Northgate High." The captain broke into a magnificent, beaming smile that transformed his entire face. He dismissed his aide with a wave of his hand, stepped past the velvet rope separating the aisle from the tables, and walked directly to me. He crouched down slightly so he was at my eye level, his gaze completely ignoring my stunned son and daughter-in-law. "I knew it," he breathed, his eyes shining. "I saw the name on the manifest, but I thought it must be a coincidence. I never dreamed. Mrs. Evans, you haven't aged a day. It's me, Leo Rossi. In Leo?" The name hit me like a rogue wave. My heart gave a great lurch. I looked closer, past the distinguished silver at his temples, past the crisp, decorated uniform, and I saw him. The troubled, defiant boy with the brilliant mind and the weight of the world on his shoulders. The boy who loved the sea. The boy I had taken a chance on all those years ago. "Leo?" I whispered, my own voice now trembling with emotion. "My goodness, Captain Leo Rossi, you did it. You really did it." "I did," he said, his voice full of pride. "But I never would have, not without you. You were the only person who ever believed in me. You saved my life, Mrs. Evans. You are the reason I am standing here today." He straightened up and addressed the entire, now silent, table. His voice boomed with the natural authority of a ship's captain. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, "I apologize for the interruption, but you must understand. This woman," he placed a hand gently on my shoulder, "is not just a passenger. She is a legend. She was my principal, my mentor, and the person who single-handedly put me on the path to this very bridge. I owe my entire career to her." He then turned his sharp, discerning gaze on Mark and Tiffany. It was the look of a captain assessing a potential problem on his ship. "You must be her family," he said, his tone shifting from warm reverence to a cool, polite inquiry. "You must be very proud." Mark and Tiffany were utterly speechless. Their faces were a comical mask of shock and confusion. Tiffany's smile was frozen on her face, her eyes darting back and forth between me and this powerful, handsome man who was treating me like royalty. It was clear from their expressions that they had no idea who he was. My past, the life I had led before I became their unimportant mother, was a complete mystery to them. The captain's professional gaze then swept back to me. "Mrs. Evans," he said, his voice warm again, "I see here you are in cabin 2046. There must be some mistake, an error in our booking system. That cabin is unacceptable. It's one of our reserve crew quarters. I am so sorry you were placed there." He turned to his aide who had rushed back to his side. "Mr. Davies, please see to it that Mrs. Evans's belongings are moved immediately to the owner's suite. And send up my personal compliments. Champagne, fresh flowers, a fruit basket. Everything. She is to be treated as my personal guest for the remainder of this voyage." The owner's suite. The most magnificent, opulent, and exclusive stateroom on the entire ship. The entire table, including my son and daughter-in-law, gasped. From trembling hands that had clutched a key to a miserable vibrating cell, I was now being given the key to a floating palace. "Oh, Captain, Leah, no," I protested, overwhelmed. "That's far too much. I couldn't possibly." "I insist," he said, his voice gentle but firm, leaving no room for argument. "It is the very least I can do to repay a small fraction of the debt I owe you. Now, if you'll all excuse me." He gave a polite nod to the rest of the table, gave my shoulder one last, respectful squeeze, and then continued his rounds, leaving a wake of stunned silence behind him. The moment he was out of earshot, the atmosphere at the table changed. The other guests were buzzing, looking at me with newfound awe and respect. My son and daughter-in-law, however, were reeling. "Mom," Mark whispered, leaning across the table, his face ashen. You know the captain of the ship. I knew a boy named Leo Rossi a very long time ago," I said calmly, taking a sip of my water. Tiffany was frantically trying to recalibrate. Her mind, which processed social status like a supercomputer, was struggling to compute this new information. "The owner's suite?" she said, her voice a strange, high-pitched squeak. "But that's the best room on the entire ship. It's usually reserved for celebrities or the CEO of the cruise line, is it?" I said, feigning mild surprise. "How nice." The awakening, my dears, was not a decision I made, but a gift that was given to me. But my fight back, that was a choice. I could have been gracious in my victory. I could have insisted Mark and Tiffany share in my good fortune. But the memory of that humming, windowless room was too fresh. The sting of their casual cruelty was too raw. I decided, in that moment, to accept Leah's gift with the grace it was offered, and to let them watch. My counterattack was not one of anger or confrontation. It was a grandma-style counterattack of quiet, powerful dignity. I used my deep knowledge of their characters, their social ambition, their obsession with appearances. From swallowing my hurt, I was now in a position of quiet, unassailable power. The next morning, I woke up in the most magnificent suite I had ever seen. It was larger than my son's entire apartment, with a sprawling living room, a dining area, a marble bathroom with a jacuzzi tub, and a vast private balcony that wrapped around the front of the ship. And it was blessedly, beautifully silent. I spent the morning on my balcony, wrapped in a plush robe, drinking coffee delivered by a personal butler. Soon, there was a knock on the door. It was Mark and Tiffany. Their demeanor was completely transformed. Gone was the condescending tolerance. In its place was a fawning, anxious eagerness. "Mom! Beatrice! Oh my God, this room is incredible," Tiffany gushed, her eyes darting around, taking in every luxurious detail. "We just wanted to see if you were settled in," Mark said, his voice strained. "And to apologize. We had no idea about the cabin, Mom. It must have been a mistake by the travel agent. We're going to demand a refund." It was a lie, a clumsy, transparent lie, and we all knew it. I just looked at them with the calm, discerning eye of a school principal who had heard every excuse in the book. "That's very thoughtful of you," I said serenely. "But there's no need. The captain has already taken care of everything." And so began their torment. A torment of their own making. That afternoon, while they were crowded around the public pool, I received a personal invitation from the captain to take a private tour of the ship's bridge. As I was escorted by a senior officer through the ship, past the velvet ropes, into the nerve center of the vessel, passengers stared. I saw Mark and Tiffany in the crowd, watching me, their faces a mixture of envy and disbelief. That evening was the private dinner on the captain's personal bridge. While they ate in the noisy main dining room, I was seated at an intimate table with Captain Rossi, overlooking the entire ship, as we reminisced about old times and he told me about his life at sea. The next day, every time I walked through the ship, crew members would stop and greet me with a nod of respect. "Good morning, Mrs. Evans. A pleasure to have you with us, Mrs. Evans." I was no longer an invisible old woman. I was the captain's mentor. My passive endurance had transformed into an active, delightful display of the respect I had always deserved. I was not just seen, I was celebrated. And my son and daughter-in-law had front-row seats to the entire show. They watched as I was invited to the exclusive chef's table for a gourmet tasting menu. They saw the personal handwritten notes that were delivered to my suite from the captain. They overheard the whispers from other passengers. "Do you know who that woman is? She's a personal friend of the captain." Their vacation, which was supposed to be a testament to their success, had been completely overshadowed. They were no longer the stars. They were the forgotten supporting cast in the story of the unimportant old woman and the powerful man who remembered her kindness. Their faces grew tighter with each passing day, their frustration and envy a palpable thing. And I, my dears, simply enjoyed my cruise. The last few days of the cruise unfolded like a perfectly scripted play. The resolution wasn't a shouting match or a tearful confrontation. It was something quieter, and in many ways more profound. It was a slow, dawning realization in the eyes of my son and his wife. They saw me being treated with a level of honor and respect they had never imagined I could command. The staff, following the captain's lead, treated me like a visiting queen. My every need was anticipated. The head sommelier would stop by my table to recommend a wine. The social director invited me to be a guest of honor at the cruise talent show. It was all a bit overwhelming, but I accepted every kindness with the grace that Captain Leah's belief in me had restored. The clear outcome of their actions was reflected back at them at every turn. They were now the ones who felt invisible. At dinner, the other guests at our table would direct all their questions to me. "Beatrice, what was the captain like as a boy? Beatrice, tell us about your tour of the bridge." Mark and Tiffany would sit in silence, their own stories of success and luxury completely eclipsed. They were no longer the center of attention, and they did not handle it well. Their faces were a constant picture of strained smiles and barely concealed resentment. The final straw for them, I believe, was on the last night. The ship held a grand farewell gala. Captain Rossi, in his finest dress uniform, made a small speech thanking all the passengers. At the end, he raised his glass. "And I would like to make one final, personal toast," he said, his voice echoing through the grand atrium. He looked out over the crowd, and his eyes found mine. "To a woman who taught me that the true measure of a person is not where they start, but the course they set for themselves. To my teacher, my mentor, and my friend, Mrs. Beatrice Evans. Thank you for everything." The entire room erupted in applause, all eyes turning to me. I stood, my heart full, and gave a small nod of acknowledgement. In that moment, surrounded by the respect of strangers, I saw my son's face. And for the first time, I didn't see guilt or envy. I saw shame. A deep, profound shame. He finally understood. He finally saw me not as his mother, an object he took for granted, but as a person in my own right, with a life and a history and an impact on the world that had nothing to do with him. Later that night, as I was packing in my beautiful suite, there was a quiet knock on the door. It was Mark. Alone. He looked pale and tired. He wouldn't meet my eyes. "Mom," he started, his voice low and heavy. I am so sorry. There's no excuse. Not for the cabin, not for how we've been treating you for years. We were arrogant, selfish. We saw you as a convenience, not as a person. And I was too weak to stand up to Tiffany, and too blind to see it myself. He finally looked at me, his eyes full of tears. Seeing the way the captain, the way everyone, looks at you. It was like seeing you for the first time. "I'm so proud of you, Mom." And I'm so deeply ashamed of myself. That was the moment the resolution settled in my heart. His apology was real. It wasn't prompted by the desire for a better cabin or social status. It was prompted by a genuine, painful awakening. The lesson I learned, my dears, is a simple one. The respect you command in the world is a reflection of the life you've led and the kindness you've shown. It cannot be bought or faked. My son and his wife thought my worth was tied to the size of my stateroom. They learned in a very public and humbling way that true status comes from character. And so, to all of you out there, I want to speak directly. If you ever feel like your family, the people who should know you best, are seeing you as a smaller version of yourself, please listen to Grandma. Children, remember Grandma's words. Never, ever let anyone else define your worth. Live a life of purpose, of kindness, of integrity. Build a legacy of character. Because you never know when a boy you helped 20 years ago will become the captain of the ship. I hope you won't be like me and wait for a public spectacle to be reminded of your own value. Know it in your heart always. Disembarking from that ship was like stepping into a new life. My relationship with my son is slowly being rebuilt. It's a difficult, painful process for him, but it's an honest one. Tiffany is quieter, more respectful. She's learning that a person's value isn't on a price tag. I see them, and I see my lovely Chloe, but things are different now. The dynamic has shifted permanently. I'm no longer an afterthought. I'm Beatrice Evans, principal, mentor, and honored guest. Sharing this story has been like coming into the final port of a long journey. Thank you for being my trusted passengers, for listening with such open hearts. It means the world to me. Please, my sweethearts, if this story resonated with you, do like the video, subscribe to our channel, and turn on that little notification bell so we don't miss our next voyage together. And please, share your own thoughts in the comments. I love reading about the times you have been unexpectedly seen and celebrated. Grandma will always love you all. Remember, no matter what happens, treat every person with dignity. And demand that they treat you with the same. Everyone deserves to be treated well, to be seen for the totality of who they are. May you all be treated with the honor you deserve. Love you all. This is Grandma Beatrice, and I'll see you in the next story.